January might look like the quiet heart of winter, but for experienced gardeners, it's actually the true beginning of the growing season. While most people are waiting for spring to arrive, the most productive gardens are already taking shape, quietly indoors beneath grow lights or along bright windowsills. Here's the reality many gardeners learn too late. If you wait until spring to start everything, you're already behind. Some vegetables simply don't tolerate delay. They require a long runway to develop properly, and if that early window is missed, no amount of perfect care later can fully fix the damage. These 6 vegetables are especially unforgiving. They demand time, patience, and an early start. If they aren't begun in January, you risk weak plants, poor yields, or losing the harvest altogether. If you want stronger seedlings, earlier production, and a garden that actually delivers instead of disappoints, these are the vegetables you should be starting right now. 1. Leeks. Leeks are the refined, slow-growing relatives of onions, and they require even more patience to do well. Unlike onions, leeks aren't grown for bulbs. What we're after are long, thick, blanched white stalks, and building that size takes months. From seed to harvest, leeks often need 5 to 6 months or more, which makes January the ideal moment to begin. When leeks are started too late, they rarely recover. Instead of developing broad, tender stalks, they remain thin and underwhelming, even if conditions are perfect later in the season. Leeks started in January grow at an unhurried pace, spending their early weeks almost entirely focused on root development. Above the soil, progress may look slow, but below the surface, the plant is building the foundation it needs for heavy growth later. This slow beginning isn't a weakness. It's the secret behind thick, high-quality leeks. Once established, leeks are remarkably cold-hardy. Early transplants tolerate chilly spring conditions far better than many other vegetables. But that toughness only works if the plants are mature enough when they're moved outdoors. Another reason the January start is so important. Sow leek seeds in trays or small pots, planting them slightly deeper than onion seeds. Keep the soil evenly moist and provide strong, consistent light. Leeks are sensitive to stress, and irregular watering or poor lighting early on can permanently stunt them. As the seedlings develop, sturdy, upright leaves will begin to form. By spring, they should be thick enough to transplant into deep holes or trenches. As they grow, soil is gradually mounded around the stems, a process called blanching that creates the long white stalks leeks are prized for. By fall, properly started leeks reward patience with thick, sweet, mild-flavored stalks that actually improve as temperatures cool. Many can be harvested well into frost and even light snow. Leeks that miss a January start rarely reach this stage. January is the line between thin, disappointing plants and truly harvest-worthy leeks. 2. Onions. Onions are a crop that quietly punishes shortcuts. They don't rush, they don't adapt, and they absolutely require an early start if you want large, dense, well-formed bulbs. For onions, January isn't optional, it's essential. What sets onions apart from most vegetables is that bulb formation is controlled by day length, not temperature. As days grow longer in late spring and early summer, onions receive a signal to stop producing leaves and begin forming bulbs. If the plant is still small when that signal arrives, the outcome is fixed. Small onions, no matter how good the soil or care is afterward. Starting onions in January gives them the time they need to build strong roots and thick leaf bases before that critical day-length shift occurs. Every leaf an onion grows early becomes a ring in the finished bulb, which means more early growth directly translates into bigger onions later. Growing onions from seed also unlocks far more variety than using store-bought sets. You can choose sweet onions, storage onions, red, white, or yellow types, and select long day, short day, or intermediate day varieties suited to your region. All of them benefit from a January start, especially in cooler climates. Sow seeds thickly in shallow trays or containers, barely covering them with soil. Onion seeds don't need depth. They need steady moisture and bright light. Within 1 to 2 weeks, thin, grass-like seedlings will appear. They may not look impressive, but this stage is crucial. Provide strong light to prevent stretching, and as the seedlings grow, trim the tops back to about 3 or 4 inches tall. This doesn't harm the plants. It actually encourages thicker stems and stronger root systems. Think of it as training onions to grow tough and resilient. By early spring, you'll have sturdy, pencil-thick transplants ready to face outdoor conditions. Once planted in the garden, these onions take off quickly. already months ahead of anything started later. Gardeners who skip January often wonder why their onions stay small or never bulb properly. The answer is simple. The clock started without them. 3. Peppers. Peppers thrive on heat, sunlight, and long summer days. But there's one thing they absolutely cannot tolerate: being rushed. When grown from seed, peppers are among the slowest vegetables in the garden. Germination alone can take 2 to 3 weeks, sometimes longer, and once seedlings emerge, early growth remains steady but cautious. That naturally slow pace is exactly why starting peppers in January makes such a huge difference. Peppers need time, not just to produce leaves, but to build thick, sturdy stems, strong branching, and a deep root system capable of supporting heavy fruit later on. When peppers are started too late, they simply never reach that mature, productive stage before the growing season runs out. A January start gives peppers a long, uninterrupted runway. Instead of scrambling to grow once spring arrives, they develop gradually indoors, protected from cold nights and unpredictable weather. By the time they move outdoors, they aren't fragile seedlings. They're already tough, well-formed plants ready to perform. Warmth is essential for pepper seeds. They germinate best in temperatures between 75 and 85 degrees Fahrenheit, which usually means using a heat mat indoors during winter. Without sufficient heat, seeds may sit dormant or rot instead of sprouting. Once seedlings appear, light becomes the top priority. Peppers require intense, direct light early on to avoid weak, stretched growth. Strong light at this stage leads directly to thicker stems later. Early started peppers also build their framework before flowering begins, a detail many gardeners overlook. Each branch becomes a future fruit-bearing site. The more branching a plant develops early, the more flowers it can support, and the greater the final harvest. Peppers started too late often begin flowering while still undersized. The result is fewer blossoms, fewer fruits, and a harvest that arrives late. Sometimes so late that peppers never fully ripen before cool weather returns. In cooler climates especially, January marks the turning point. Peppers that get an early start can produce steadily all summer and into fall. Late-started plants often manage only a small handful of peppers before frost shuts everything down. Peppers reward patience. Give them a January beginning, and they respond with heavier yields, thicker flesh, richer flavor, and earlier harvests. Skip that early window, and no amount of summer heat can recover what was lost. 4. Eggplant. Eggplant follows the same basic principles as peppers, but with even higher demands and far less tolerance for mistakes. These plants require time, warmth, and consistency, and if any of those are missing early on, they never truly reach their potential. From seed, eggplants are slow and methodical. Germination can take several weeks, and once seedlings emerge, visible growth remains minimal at first. Instead of rushing upward, the plant focuses on building its root system. This hidden early work is critical, and a January start gives eggplants the time they need to do it properly. That early structure determines everything that follows. Eggplants produce large, heavy fruit, and without strong roots and thick, woody stems, plants struggle. Blossoms drop, pollination suffers, and fruit set becomes unreliable. Late-started eggplants may look healthy, but they often lack the internal strength needed to support sustained production. Eggplants started in January enter spring already established. When they're transplanted outdoors, they don't stall or struggle. They accelerate. Warming soil and rising temperatures trigger rapid growth rather than transplant shock, allowing the plant to shift its energy directly into flowering. Early size matters because eggplants need time. Time to flower, time to set fruit, and time for those fruits to fully mature. In many regions, warm weather arrives suddenly and leaves just as quickly. A late start means plants are still trying to grow when they should already be producing. Strong early development leads to thicker stems, increased branching, better airflow, and more reliable pollination. Flowers stay attached instead of dropping, fruit sets more consistently, and eggplants grow larger, glossier, and more evenly shaped. Late-started eggplants often produce only a few undersized fruits before cooling temperatures slow them down. January-started plants, on the other hand, continue producing well into late summer and early fall. If you want deep-colored, glossy eggplants with rich flavor, not weak plants with a disappointing harvest, January isn't a suggestion. It's the foundation for success. 5. Celery. Celery is one of the most commonly misunderstood crops in home gardening, and without a doubt, one of the least tolerant of mistakes. Many people assume it behaves like lettuce or leafy herbs, expecting quick results once it's planted. In reality, celery follows its own rules, and missing the January start almost always leads to disappointment. Celery has an unusually long growing cycle, often requiring 120 to 150 days from seed to harvest. What makes it even trickier is how slowly it develops in the early stages. For the first month or more, seedlings appear almost frozen in time. This isn't a problem, and it's simply how celery grows. Starting celery in January removes pressure from the process. Instead of forcing growth later or trying to recover lost time, you give the plant exactly what it needs: a slow, steady beginning. Celery seeds are incredibly tiny, almost powder-like, and they need light in order to germinate. If they're buried under soil, they often fail to sprout altogether. The surface of the soil must stay consistently moist, but never waterlogged. Even a short dry period during germination can completely halt development. Temperature control is equally important. Celery germinates best between 65 and 75 degrees Fahrenheit, and maintaining that stable range is far easier indoors during January than outdoors in early spring. Once seedlings emerge, patience becomes essential. Growth above the soil remains minimal for weeks. Slender stems and small leaves appear slowly, testing even experienced gardeners. But underground, the plant is building a strong, widespread root system, and that hidden growth determines the final quality of the stalks. Celery prefers cool conditions but reacts poorly to stress. Heat, inconsistent watering, drought, or sudden temperature changes can all cause serious problems. Under stress, celery turns bitter, hollow, and stringy. An early start allows the plant to mature before intense summer heat arrives, preserving the crisp texture and mild flavor that makes celery worthwhile. Gardeners who postpone celery until spring often spend the entire season fighting setbacks. Plants stay thin, bolt too early, or never form thick stalks at all. In many cases, the harvest simply doesn't justify the effort. January started celery enters the garden well-rooted, stable, and ready for consistent growth. By the time summer heat arrives, the plants are already developed enough to handle it without sacrificing quality. With celery, timing determines everything, and January is the line between struggle and success. 6. Artichokes. Artichokes stand apart from almost every other vegetable you can grow. They aren't quick crops or casual additions to the garden. They're long-term commitments that require foresight, patience, and deliberate planning. But when handled correctly, they deliver one of the most striking and rewarding harvests possible. When grown from seed, artichokes take an extraordinary amount of time to mature. Many varieties require 8 to 12 months before they're capable of producing edible buds. Because of that, timing isn't just important, it's critical. Starting artichokes in January gives them the extended development period they need to build size, strength, and energy reserves. Without that early foundation, plants may produce lush foliage, but never cross the threshold required to form buds. Artichokes also depend on temperature signals. Most varieties need exposure to cool conditions in order to trigger flowering later on. But here's the catch. The plant must already be large and mature enough to respond to that signal. Small, underdeveloped plants simply don't react. A January start ensures artichokes are well established by the time spring temperature swings arrive. That early cold exposure becomes a cue for bud production rather than a source of stress. As artichokes grow, they transform into massive, sculptural plants with thick stems and silvery, deeply cut leaves. They command space, draw attention, and reshape the look of the garden. But that dramatic growth only happens when the plant is given enough time from the beginning. Gardeners who start artichokes too late often end up with impressive foliage and no harvest. The plants look healthy, but buds never form, a disappointment that almost always traces back to late planting. January started artichokes move into the growing season already ahead. They grow faster, interpret environmental cues correctly, and are far more likely to produce large, tender buds in their very first year. And once they're established, many artichoke plants continue producing for years, turning that early January investment into a long-term reward.